The Rebellions of 37 AC. When Aegon the Conqueror died, the Seven Kingdoms immediately fractured. His son, Aenys I, was perceived as soft king, and the realm took advantage of that. Within months, 4 different rebels declared themselves kings, forcing the young dynasty into a multi-front survival struggle. In the Riverlands, Harren the Red used a security breach strategy. He and his outlaws used the massive, unmanageable scale of Harrenhal to slip past guards and unalive the king's hand. His ability was essentially using the castle's own size as cover for an assassination. Meanwhile, in the Vale, Jonos Arryn relied on high ground defense. He imprisoned his own brother and banked on the Erie's mountain peaks to make him untouchable to any ground-based retaliation. Over on the Iron Islands, a priest named Lodos used fanatic morale to convince thousands that their faith in the drowned god made them immune to steel. Finally, in the Reach, the King of the Bread used economic warfare. By controlling grain during a famine, he turned the starving small folk into a peasant army that the highborn lords had no idea how to handle. Aenys I was paralyzed by the scale of it all. The tragedy only ended when his brother, Maegor, and Queen Visenya took over. They didn't wait for negotiation. Instead, they used their dragons to systematically hunt and execute every rebel. The Faith Militant Uprising. After the initial chaos of 37 AC, the Targaryens faced a much larger threat. This wasn't a rebellion led by a disgruntled lord or a single house. It was a total holy war. The High Septon branded the Targaryens abominations due to their tradition of incestuous marriage, effectively turning the entire continent's religion against the crown. The uprising was fought by 2 military arms, the warriors' sons, who were elite armored knights, and the poor fellows, a massive army of fanatical commoners. The Faith's primary ability was relentless fanaticism. Unlike standard soldiers, these rebels didn't care about coin or land. They believed that dying in battle against demons guaranteed them a place in the 7 heavens. This made them terrifying. They didn't even attempt to retreat when they saw a dragon. Instead, they stood their ground and sang hymns while being burned alive. When Maegor the Cruel took the throne, he responded with his usual no negotiation policy. At the Battle of Stone Bridge, he slaughtered the poor fellows so thoroughly that the river Mander reportedly ran red for 20 miles. His most famous move, however, took place in King's Landing. The warriors' sons had fortified themselves inside the Sept of Remembrance, expecting a traditional siege. Instead, Maegor simply flew Balerion the Black Dread over the building and roasted everyone inside at once. But rather than ending the conflict, this tragedy only fueled the fire. For every martyr Maegor burned, 1,000 more people joined the cause. The war didn't stop until his successor, Jaehaerys the Conciliator, took the throne. Jaehaerys used diplomatic disarmament, offering to protect the Faith forever if they agreed to disband their private armies. It was the moment the Targaryens realized that some things can't be won by dragons. Aegon the Uncrowned's Rebellion. This was the first time the Targaryens really turned on each other. When Aenys I died, his brother Maegor just swooped in and grabbed the throne, while the actual heir, Aegon, was stuck at Crakehall. Aegon wasn't going to just let it slide, though. He managed to pull together a massive army, about 15,000 guys from the West and the Riverlands, who were all sick of Maegor's path of destruction. Aegon's whole edge was that he was the rightful heir. He had the name and the blood, and for a lot of lords, that still meant something. They eventually met at the God's Eye. Aegon was riding Quicksilver, and he tried to use high-speed aerial maneuvers to stay out of Maegor's reach. The problem was that Maegor was on Balerion, and there's just no competing with a dragon that big. While the armies were killing each other on the ground, Maegor dove out of the clouds and basically swatted Quicksilver out of the air. He ripped the poor dragon's wing off, and Aegon went down with her. The First Blackfyre Rebellion. The First Blackfyre Rebellion was a turning point for Westeros, as it was a fight over which brother was more Targaryen. King Aegon IV, or Aegon the Unworthy, had legitimized all his bastards on his deathbed, but the conflict really ignited because of the sword, Blackfyre. This was the blade of Aegon the Conqueror, and when the king gave it to his bastard son, Daemon, instead of his scholarly heir, Daeron, it was seen as a silent endorsement of who should truly rule. Daemon Blackfyre's primary ability was peerless martial charisma. According to the histories, he was the warrior made flesh. He inspired a fanatical devotion that made lords risk their lives for a man with no legal claim to the throne. His mere presence on the battlefield provided a morale boost that Daeron's more bureaucratic government couldn't match. On the other side stood Brynden Bloodraven Rivers, whose ability was total surveillance. He used a network of spies and sorcery, the 1,000 Eyes and One, to stay 3 steps ahead of the rebels. The tragedy of this rebellion reached its peak at the Red Grass Field. Daemon was winning. He had just defeated the legendary Sir Gawain Corbray in an hour-long duel of Valyrian steel. But Daemon's greatest strength was also his downfall, his code of chivalry. Instead of pressing his advantage, he stopped the battle to ensure his fallen opponent was taken to the maesters. This pause gave Bloodraven the window he needed. He moved his elite archers, the Raven's Teeth, to a high ridge and rained arrows down on Daemon and his sons. The rebellion ended not because Daemon was outfought, but because he was outmaneuvered by a man who didn't care about honor. Second Blackfyre Rebellion. The second attempt to put a Blackfyre on the throne took the form of a secret conspiracy. It was centered around a wedding tournament at a castle called White Walls, where a group of loyalist lords planned to crown Daemon the second Blackfyre. Daemon, too, operated differently than his father. He relied on prophetic dreaming. He claimed to have seen a vision of a dragon hatching at White Walls, and believed this meant his victory was inevitable. However, the rebellion was compromised before it even started. Bloodraven used his network of spies to infiltrate the wedding party and track every lord involved. Instead of waiting for the tournament to end and a war to break out, he marched a royal army to the castle gates while the guests were still feasting. The tragedy for Daemon II was a total misinterpretation of his own vision. A dragon did hatch at the tournament, but it was the young Targaryen prince, Aegon V, who was there in disguise and revealed himself to stop the plot. No massive battle ever took place. Daemon II was taken to a dungeon in the Red Keep and kept as a political hostage. Third Blackfyre Rebellion. The Third Uprising saw Aegon I Blackfyre invade with the support of Bittersteel, leading to the most violent clash since the First Rebellion. Bittersteel utilized the mercenary discipline, fielding the battle-hardened Golden Company against the Crown. The conflict peaked in a legendary duel between Bittersteel and Bloodraven, where Bittersteel finally took his rival's eye. Despite this, Aegon was captured and dishonorably unalived after surrendering, ending the invasion in a bitter, bloody stalemate. Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion. The fourth attempt was a desperate invasion led by Daemon III Blackfyre. He landed at Massey's Hook, but the rebellion lacked the lordly support of previous generations. King Aegon V led the defense personally, using tactical superiority to trap the rebels against the sea. The conflict ended quickly when the Kingsguard Knight, Sir Duncan the Tall, slew Daemon III in single combat. The rebel army shattered, proving the Blackfyre cause was finally losing its momentum. War of Nine Pennykings, or the last Blackfyre Rebellion. The final Blackfyre Rebellion took place in the Stepstones, led by the last of the male line, Maelys the Monstrous. Maelys was a captain of the Golden Company who reportedly possessed abnormal physical prowess. He was a giant of a man, with a second parasitic head growing from his neck, and he was strong enough to kill a horse with a single punch. He joined forces with 8 other outlaws to form the Ninepenny Kings, a pact to carve out kingdoms for themselves. Westeros didn't wait for an invasion this time. The Iron Throne sent a massive force to the islands to preempt the strike. This conflict served as a proving ground for the next generation of legendary figures, including a young Tywin Lannister and Sir Barristan Selmy. They used combat mastery to cut a bloody path through the Golden Company's ranks, eventually reaching Maelys himself. In a brutal duel, Barristan slew the monstrous pretender, effectively ending the Blackfyre threat forever. Then it left the Seven Kingdoms with a generation of battle-hardened lords who would eventually use those same skills to to tear down the Targaryen dynasty during Robert's Rebellion. The Peake Uprising, or the rebellion against Maekar I. The Peake Uprising was a brief but localized explosion of violence caused by House Peake's refusal to accept their defeat and loss of their lands. Lord Gorman Peake led the rebellion, relying on the defensive fortification of Starpike to hold out against the crown. While the conflict was small in scale compared to the Blackfyre Wars, it resulted in a massive strategic loss for the Targaryens. During the siege of Starpike, King Maekar I was crushed by a falling rock thrown from the battlements, dying instantly. This created a sudden succession crisis, as the king was killed by a common castle defense rather than a grand betrayal. Though the uprising was eventually crushed and Gorman Peake executed, the rebellion of Lyonnel Lyonnel Baratheon was known as the Laughing Storm, was sparked by a broken marriage pact. King Aegon V's heir, Prince Duncan, broke his betrothal to Lyonnel's daughter to marry a commoner, Jenny of Oldstones. Feeling his house's honor had been spit upon, Lyonnel renounced his fealty and declared himself the new Storm King. Lyonnel's primary advantage was immense physicality and combat experience. He was one of the greatest warriors of his age. He broke his opponents in tourneys. The rebellion didn't end with a war of attrition. Instead, it was settled by a trial by combat. The king's champion, Sir Duncan the Tall, faced Lyonnel in a grueling duel. Duncan eventually forced Lyonnel to yield, ending the short-lived revolt and restoring peace through a new marriage pact, the Reyne-Tarbeck Revolt. It serves as the definitive transition from the era of soft-hearted kings to the ruthless reign of the Lannisters. While the Targaryens were busy with their own succession crises, the West began to rot from within. Lord Tytos Lannister was a weak ruler, allowing his vassals, the Reynes of Castamere and the Tarbecks of Tarbeck Hall, to ignore their debts and seize lands that didn't belong to them. They viewed Tytos as a joke, but they failed to account for his heir, a young Tywin Lannister. Unlike his father, who sought peace through forgiveness, Tywin viewed rebellion as an infection that needed to be burned out at the root. When the Reynes and Tarbecks officially rose in defiance, Tywin didn't wait for permission from the crown. He marched his forces with a speed and ferocity that caught both houses completely off guard. The Tarbecks were dealt with first. Tywin used heavy siege engines to bring their castle down on their heads, extinguishing the entire line in a single afternoon. When the Reynes saw the destruction, they retreated to the underground galleries of Castamere, thinking their subterranean fortress was impregnable. They offered terms, but Tywin didn't even respond. Instead, he ordered his men to seal every exit and divert a nearby stream into the mines. The tragedy followed. Hundreds of men, women, and children were drowned in the dark, with no way to escape. Tywin then ordered Castamere to be destroyed to the ground, ensuring that no stone remained. The Defiance of Duskendale. It began when Lord Dennis Darklyn, seeking greater autonomy, withheld taxes and took King Aerys II hostage. For 6 months, the king was held captive within the Dun Fort, with Tywin Lannister's army waiting outside. Tywin's strategy was patient siege warfare, but the situation turned desperate as Aerys was tortured and humiliated. The standoff ended through the stealth infiltration of Sir Barristan Selmy. Disguised as a beggar, Barristan scaled the walls, rescued the king, and escaped under a hail of arrows. Once free, Aerys' sanity shattered. He ordered the total execution of House Darklyn and House Hollard. This event transformed Aerys from a flawed ruler into the Mad King. Robert's Rebellion, also known as the War of the Usurper, was the final death knell for the Targaryen dynasty. The conflict ignited when the Mad King, Aerys II, executed the Warden of the North and his heir, then demanded the heads of Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark. Instead of obeying, the rebels raised their banners, fueled by a mixture of righteous fury and a desperate need for survival. Robert Baratheon's primary advantage was martial momentum. He was a whirlwind on the battlefield, wielding a massive warhammer that few men could even lift. His ability to turn defeated enemies into staunch allies through his sheer charisma allowed the rebel coalition to grow, even after early setbacks. Opposing him was Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. The tragedy reached its climax at the Battle of the Trident. In the middle of the river, Robert and Rhaegar met in single combat. Despite being wounded, Robert landed a crushing blow to Rhaegar's chest. With the Crown Prince dead, the royalist cause collapsed. The war ended in King's Landing. Aerys II was slain by his own Kingsguard, Jaime Lannister, ending 3 centuries of dragon rule. Robert ascended the Iron Throne. The Greyjoy Rebellion. 6 years after Robert Baratheon took the throne, Balon Greyjoy declared the Iron Islands independent, seeking to return to the old way of reaving. Balon's strength lay in naval superiority, as the Iron Fleet initially caught the realm off guard by burning the Lannister fleet at anchor. However, the rebellion underestimated the unified power of the new regime. Stannis Baratheon smashed the Iron Fleet in a massive sea battle, allowing the royal army to land on Pike. Balon was forced to surrender, his sons were killed, and his last child, Theon, was taken as a hostage to ensure the islands remained silent. Sistermen Rebellion. While Aegon the Conqueror was busy melting Harrenhal and fighting on the mainland, the 3 sisters saw a window to finally break away from the Vale. The 3 sisters had ancient roots as pirate kingdoms, and they crowned Lady Marla Sunderland as their queen, renouncing the Iron Throne. Marla's primary advantage was nautical camouflage. The waters around the sisters are a graveyard of jagged rocks and perpetual thick mist. She banked on the fact that the royal fleet was too bulky and unfamiliar with the terrain to navigate the channels without wrecking. The tragedy for Marla was that she underestimated the Starks and their connections. Torrhen Stark, who had just bent the knee to Aegon, sent a northern army on hired Braavosi galleys to handle the islands. Queen Visenya also flew Vhagar over the islands to show them what happens to rebels. As soon as the Sistermen saw a dragon in the sky and northern ships in the water, they didn't fight for their queen. They grabbed Marla and handed her over to the Starks to save their own heads. Marla was exiled and ended her days as a silent sister. The War of the Five Kings shattered the peace of Robert's reign following his death and the execution of Eddard Stark. Robb Stark, crowned the king in the north, led a secessionist movement fueled by vengeance. Robb's defining advantage was unbeaten battlefield intuition. Despite being a teenager, he outmaneuvered seasoned commanders like Tywin Lannister, winning every tactical engagement he fought, most notably at the Whispering Wood, where he captured Jaime Lannister. However, the war's tragedy was that Robb's military genius couldn't overcome his political inexperience. While he won every battle, his enemies won the war through shadows. After Robb broke a crucial marriage pact with House Frey, Tywin Lannister orchestrated a violation of guest right. At the infamous Red Wedding, Robb was betrayed and murdered by his own bannermen, the Boltons and the Freys, under a pretext of peace.